Friends, I hope you are doing well. Myself, Abhishek Tripathi. I have a near about 7 year experience, and in data engineering field, I have a 4 year experience. So I'm going to continue the interview question and answer for Tata AIG data engineering, with whatever question they have asked. So I will give the one brief in details. So before first round, they have given one aptitude test, so I have completed. Then they schedule this round, and there is a after that there is a manager round uh, and HR round. So I was given this interview where in near about April or March or April. So when I was looking for the job, so I'm going to share the my interview experience, and totally this video focused on the execution mode and file format of the Spark. So I'm going to start. So the first question they have asked in this 11th question they have asked, "Ki what are the execution mode in Spark? What are the execution mode in Spark?" So I told him simply, Spark has a three primary execution mode that define how and where application are run in distributed environment. So in here, so nothing but description. I will give. There are three modes. First is local mode. Second is cluster mode, and third is client mode. So what will happen in local mode? So I will give the description here. The entire Spark application run on a single machine, like my computer. If I'm running this Spark, I'm creating any. I don't have any client environment. I'm running for my development purpose and learning purpose. So I will use my personal laptop. So the nothing but a single machine is nothing but my personal laptop, useful for development, testing, and small scale processing. Characteristic: no cluster is involved, executes jobs on a single JVM, easy to debug on there, uses local development and debugging. So I have to define while I'm configuring this Spark. So specify using master local and local en and local 4 for 4 threads on there. So second mode is cluster mode. So cluster mode, is description. So cluster mode is nothing but Spark description. The Spark application run on a cluster of machines like virtual environment. So where cluster of the machines means there are 4 to 5 node executor available, that called we are calling nodes, and that group called as a cluster on there. So resource CPU memory and distributed across multiple nodes on there. Characteristic: so used for production workloads when we are working with production and do not want to interrupt our job any time of failure. So that time we are using a cluster mode. So cluster manager launches the driver and executor on the cluster on there, and it is used for large scale data processing on there. And another mode is client mode. What is client mode? The Spark driver run on the machine where the application is submitted. Spark driver run on the machine where is the application is submitted, while executor run on the cluster. While the executor run on the cluster. Characteristic: driver interacts directly with the cluster from the client machine, because our driver in client machine. Okay, and requests require stable network connectivity between the client and the cluster. So usage for interactive application like notebook or when debugging. So I will explain what is the difference between cluster mode and client mode. This is a very confusing term, and anyone, if interviewer has a good knowledge, so he will caught you, and he will ask too many questions on there if you're simply not learning proper way. Okay, so another part is, what is the difference between between cluster and client mode? So client mode is nothing but run on the client machine where the application is submitted. So client machine is nothing but, you know that of earlier we don't have any virtual environment. We are not using AWS and Azure and Google services. So there is a set of the servers are in every company is there, and their peoples are available for managing. So that time there is a a primary server and secondary server, such type of the things. So that is known as a client machine on there. So here whatever whatever a job we are running is run on the cluster nodes, and but driver is our in client machine. So if connectivity is not good, any interruption done, so job become fail. So require stable network connectivity between the client and the cluster. High latency for communication between the driver and executor due to the client cluster network. So ideal for interactive job, debugging, or development in notebook or IDs or for client mode. So another another six number point, depend on the client machine. If it disconnect or fail, the job is interpreted. You know that the things, yeah, you know that the things. Your if job got failed, your if machine network got disconnected, anything happened, so job will interrupted. So limited to client machine resource for driver, limited and easier to set up, suitable for smaller testing environment. So you know that the client machine where there is a limited resource, we cannot scale and scale up, scale down as per our requirement. You know the things if you are a basic understanding of the server on there. So another part is cluster mode. So cluster mode is nothing but run on the one of the node in the cluster, run on the cluster nodes, no continuous connection required from the client, lower latency. So because driver is I believe one of the cluster node, so there is whatever job is running, they directly they are sending to communication to driver in the particular executor, which is reside on the cluster mode. So there, if connection lost, nothing will happen. It will complete on time. You will not after you will once your network up, you can see that it is it will complete successfully. So lower latency since the driver and executor are closer, best for production in workload and non-interactive jobs. So more silent, the driver is managed by the cluster itself. Driver resources are allocated by the cluster. So means if I require if I have a huge data, if I have a huge data and I want to process huge amount of the data, so that time if we have already defined the auto scaling parameters, so it will automatically scale and scale up, scale down on there. And there requires proper cluster configuration for production on there. So key takeaway, what is the difference majorly. So client mode, the driver must remain on the client machine, which is ideal for interactive workflow but depend heavily on the network connectivity. If network connectivity lasts, your job will interrupt. Cluster mode, the driver run within the cluster, making it suitable for production under large scale distribution workload on there. Now another question is there: if both client and cluster mode, cluster node, then we are not performing client mode over cluster mode. So if both client and cluster mode, 1 minute, what is something? Yeah, if both client and cluster mode are using cluster node, both are using, then why we are not preferring client mode over the cluster mode? So you can see that in above CMD ki I told you both are performing, driver is located on the client mode and all the work doing by the cluster node. So my question, he asked me, if both work done by the cluster node, so then why we are not preferring client mode over cluster mode? Then I have given the answer. While both client mode and cluster mode are using cluster node to execute tasks, the difference lie in where the driver program run. Main difference is the driver program where run and its implications. So hence why cluster mode is generally preferred over client mode for the production workload. So reason to prefer cluster mode over client mode, I will let you know. In client mode, the driver run on the client machine. If the client machine disconnects or fails, the Spark job is interrupted, leading to potential data loss or incomplete processing. In cluster mode, the driver run within the cluster and it is managed by the cluster manager, or making it easier, resilient to failure. Okay, and the first is driver location and fault tolerance. Another part is network dependency. So client mode requires stable and reliable network connection between the client machine and the cluster. Any network disrupt then can halt the job. And cluster mode does not depend on the continuous client connection. Ensure job stability even if the client disconnect. Another, resource availability. So the driver in client mode relying on the client machine, a resource CPU memory. For large scale job, the client machine may become a bottleneck. It will, because we cannot scale up immediately. But in cluster mode, the driver resources are allocated by the cluster, ensure sufficient resource for the execution on there. Then another part is latency and communication. In client mode, the driver communicates with the executor over the network, which can introduce higher latency. In cluster mode, the driver and executor are loaded closer to each other within the cluster, so lead to lower latency and faster communication. So you understand, if my uh, suppose I'm working with my uh, if I'm example giving example, I'm working, I will give the example within after 2 minutes. Okay. Scalability. So client mode is not ideal for very large scale load due to the its depend on the client machine's limitations. So cluster mode scales better as the cluster handles resource allocation for the both the driver and executor, both driver and executor. So another part is production workload suitability. So cluster mode is designed for production workloads where reliability, scalability, and fault tolerance are critical. So client mode is more suitable for interactive workflow development and debugging on there. So another part, I will give here some brief of above. So client mode is useful for testing, debugging, or interactive session like Jupyter Notebook, Spark Cell. Like cluster mode is the preferred choice for production workload due to its fault tolerance, resource allocation, and independence from client machine limitations. So for reliable and scalable distributed processing, cluster mode is the best option. So anyone going to ask you this question, this is the common question. If interviewer has a good knowledge, then he will ask you this question. So okay. So then another question is how it would help to better resource utilization. How it will help to better resource utilization in cluster mode. So cluster mode improve the resource utilization by leveraging centralized management, dynamic allocation, and distributed processing across the entire cluster. It ensure scalability, minimize resource wastage, and minimize the efficiency of the Spark job on there. Then another question he asked, if the configuration of the both client and cluster mode is same, then do you see the advantage of client mode over the cluster mode? Then I told, yeah, then I have given the answer, and I'm going to tell you what I have given answer. If the configuration of both the client machine and cluster node is the same, the advantage of client mode over a cluster mode become minimal for more production scenario. However, there are a few specific cases where client mode might have some advantage. So I will give the scenario where it will be more advantage. Well, so first, client mode is better suited for interactive applications such as working in the Jupyter Notebook, Spark Cell, or real-time debugging, where direct interaction with the driver is beneficiary. So driver is a second part is driver is immediately accessed on the client machine, so make it easier to inspect logs and output in real time. This is the benefit of interactive workflow. Another, just simplified setup and for development, simplified setup for development and testing. So for small scale workload, using client mode eliminate and need the for additional setup to run the driver on the cluster, so easier access to logs and debugging information locally during the development. So another point is no need to high availability in non critical job. So for non critical job or short lived job where high availability and fault tolerance are not primarily concerned, so client mode is simpler to use on there. Another part is resource isolation for uh, resource isolation for the specific use case. So if the client machine is dedicated to a single user or job, so client mode allow the user to have a full control over the driver without interference from cluster level configuration and shared resource on there. Then I will let you know why cluster mode is still prevails on there. So I asked him, even the identical configuration, cluster mode generally remain the preferred choice for the following reason. So what is fault tolerance? In client mode, if the client must is disconnected, the job fail. Cluster mode ensure job to connectivity because the driver is managed by the cluster itself on there. Network dependency. So client mode requires a stable network connection between the client and cluster node, and which might not always be reliable. Cluster mode eliminates this dependency on the resource efficiency. We know that I already told you that cluster mode optimize resource utilization by running the driver in the same environment. So suppose driver required only two worker and two nodes, so it will complete the work in two nodes without going for the first merge node. But if it required only four as per requirement, it will manage on the source executor, reducing communication overhead on there. Scalability for large production workload, cluster mode scale better as it is designed to handle high workload across distributed environments on there. Another, while client mode has advantage in interactive workflow and testing scenario, cluster mode is still more reliable and efficient for the production workload. Even if the configuration are the same, the choice depend on the use case, like development and debugging for favor client mode, while production and scalability favor cluster mode on there. So you understand ki, if both configuration safe, so what you have to do. Now another question he asked me, how much data volume are how are you handling? So I told him the data volume I have worked with the varies depend on the project and use cases. So typically in distributed environment like Spark, I have handled the ranging from the small to medium scale in like GB and large scale in TB, not more than. Sometimes it is depend on the project to case, project to project on there. So he asked me how you can configure in Spark Summit on the above scenario. How I can configure in Spark Summit on above scenario. So use case is nothing but development testing and small case batch processing goal. First, for I'm going for the small case, small to medium scale. So how I can define Spark Summit master cluster is yarn deployment mode client number of executor. How many you want to do? You two executor cores two and CPU core two and executor memory 4 GB, driver memory 2 GB, and config spark.sql.shuffle partition equal to 50. Then your spice then if define your means your job here. So key configuration, number of executor equal to 2 means 2 executor are sufficient for small data sets. Executor memory 4G allocates enough memory for the processing without over allocation. So spark sql.shuffle.partition equal to 50 means reduce shuffle partition to avoid unnecessary overhead on there. Now I am going to let you know the large scale in TVs. So means if I am handling with TVs data on there, so it like ETL jobs aggregation and transformation and significantly data sets means goal optimize parallelism and resource allocation and distributed processing. So how I can write the Spark Summit command here. So Spark Summit master yarn deployment cluster a number of executor 10 core 4. If I have a 10 executor, then core 4, so how many workers will you can calculate from your side. Executor memory 16 GB, drive and memory 8 GB, and I have to enable dynamic allocation enable true, and shuffle partition I have to give to 200, and executor memory overhead I have to give to 2 GB. Then I have to define my job here. So key configuration, number of executor 10, distributed workload across 10 executor, executor core force ensure good parallelism within the which each executor. So I will explain this thing concept in later, but in a separate video, because if I'm going to explain here, so it will create a it will become a big, huge video for 1 hour, more than 30 minutes. I want to keep it in 30 minutes. So Spark dynamically enabled true allows Spark to adjust resource dynamically. Spark SQL shuffles partition 200. Set a reasonable number of shuffle partition for a large data value on there. So, for example breakdown I'm doing here. Example breakdown for a scenario within with 500 GB of data. Set 550 executor, each with 4 core and 16 GB memory. Then it adjusts shuffle partition by 500, 1 G per GB for balance shuffling. 1 GB for balance shuffling. Okay. And another question he asked. So okay, I will keep. I'm not do. I do not want to make a huge video. So I will keep another question like uh, another volume rated and file format related in another video. So I will upload tomorrow for that video. So I think I have done for today in this video, because it is going to more than 30 minutes, so it is difficult. uh, it is not so good for everyone. So I am requesting you, please like and subscribe my channel, and keep press the bell icon for more video. And I'm requesting you, please like and subscribe my channel.